So welcome to our CI Fellows, Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows webinar. And this month we are devoting the topic to competitive intelligence practices. What's on your mind? And as I just mentioned very briefly during our side chat ahead of this, we get a lot of questions as fellows, individually and collectively, regarding CI practices. And we have really interesting offline conversations with other practitioners, with each other. And oftentimes we find ourselves thinking, boy, if we could just broadcast this, right, it could be much more useful, to the community at large. And also not just to help people answer specific questions, but to spark other ideas. And so that's really one of the strengths of I think, this council, this group, of the thought leaders, as well as, as really keen and experienced practitioners. And so the idea here is that we want to begin these conversations, and we've started these conversations really, over the course of the years through these webinars, in the chats, as many of you know, as well as through the Q&A feature here on Zoom, and as well as audio and video. But we've centered around specific topics. But there are oftentimes, and many of you have noticed too, that there are side questions going on in the chats that sometimes are off topic. And so the thought is, well, it would be really good to have a forum in which we have these discussions. And so this is really the start of the first of these forums, where we can have open Q&A, talk about what's on our mind, and see what happens organically. Some of you have already shared with us your questions, so you've emailed them to us, and which has been very helpful, and I've queued some of these up already onto the deck. I do want to point out, though, that if your question does not appear, it does not mean that we have not used it. Sometimes we roll them into other questions, so for the sake of streamlining. And for many of you, you may have additional questions or questions you simply haven't shared yet that you may want to share via the chat feature. So please use the chat feature on your control panel in Zoom. And you can see that there's already a robust conversation going on there, as usual. And also use the Q&A. And any questions that we're not able to get to today, we will save them, and we will bring them onto our LinkedIn group. And so we will see a follow-up there, and we can carry on the conversation there, so we don't have to wait until our next Q&A session. So with that, I just want to do an introduction to the council for those of you who are new with us, and there are always a few with every webinar. And so the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellow is a nonprofit educational organization whose mission really is to support the CI discipline in many ways: service to the profession and service to the professional itself. So those of you who are with us. So we serve various roles as ambassadors, champions, mentors, and educators. And so through this, the webinars, this series provides an important component, and we have other aspects of this too, the articles, and we're also developing podcasts and so forth. And so please be on the lookout for those things. But we're ever expanding in our efforts here. And so the panels that you'll see today are the CI Fellows. And the CI Fellows began as an honorary organization that recognized people for their achievements and contributions to the profession and the discipline of CI. And nowadays, we're also very much a service organization as well. So we're actively finding ways of serving our fellow practitioners and the broader community in CI and related practices, through intelligence practices and ethics. So with that, I just want to say that I should have added more names here, but we have some fellows who joined us at the last minute. But we have here, Andrew Burskins from the UK. And I'm Cynthia Chang Correa, head of the CI Fellows, and I'm based in the United States. And Craig Fleischer is our VP, who's also based in the US. Clifford Cow, a past president of the Fellows, a past chair of the Fellows, is also with us as well from the States, and Luis Madureira from Portugal. And we also have among our panel as well, Eric Johnson, and he's joining us from Wisconsin, and you'll also know him too because he and Aurora WDC run Reconverge. And so I don't think I'm missing anybody else today, among the fellows set. And it may be that I may be adding people who are able to join us midstream as well. But these are the fellows who will be contributing to this discussion, answering your questions. And I do want to encourage you all to contribute to the answers as well, because we have seasoned practitioners among us. We have people with very important perspectives from around the globe and across sectors. And so it's just really important that this is a conversation and not just a formal Q&A. So with that, having said that, I want to start with a really interesting question that serendipitously came to us actually just a few minutes before the session started. We have other questions queued up, but this one, I feel is a great way of starting things out. Oops, because it really captures what CI is about. And so with that, I'll just start with the first bullet, is saying, I'm very interested in foresight and was wondering if it would be considered a complementary skill set with CI. So I love this question, and so I'm just going to exercise some discipline and withhold my answers and allow my fellows to take a stab at this first. And I know quite a few of you are chomping at the bit on this one as well. So who wants to take this one for Justin Solis? And please unmute yourselves too.
I'll go ahead and give it a start if that sounds all right. I'm sure the others will jump in. But,
yes.
So the answer to that, is it considered a complementary skill set? Well, my version of the answer would say absolutely it is. And here's why. We've always been in the CI field, and for those of us who do market research or economic research or commercial research, business research, etc., most of us have always been associated with insight. Some of us, in reality, also do a lot of work with our financials, and in that respect, we're kind of looking in the rear view mirror and we're getting hindsight as well. So the way I've always analogized this, and it fits into my answer, is it takes hindsight plus insight plus, and here's where the question actually comes into play, plus it takes foresight to really build a complete picture of a particular phenomenon that we're interested in. So my simple answer, without going any further, is yeah, absolutely, I think it does. And I'll just say from my own research, I've been doing research on foresight on and off for about 30 years now. I think there needs to be more of it. I don't think we've exercised it to near as high a degree, or maybe as an effective degree, as many of us ought to. That's me included, by the way.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, anyone else? I see you've got a smile there, Luis.
Yep. I was trying to jump in. Building on what Craig was saying, and hi to everyone that I still not talked to. Actually, for competitive intelligence to be competitive intelligence, you have to have an actionable insight. So to be actionable, you actually, as Craig was saying, you have to build on hindsight and on present insight to then and to be actionable, you have to have foresight. So it must be something that's going to happen in the future, because otherwise you'll have information that you will not be able to action. So for it to be competitive intelligence, it must be actionable. So it actually has got to be also foresight. So it definitely is part of CI.
Absolutely, absolutely. I might even add too, I agree with you. I think it's vital. I don't think that we can properly carry out CI without foresight, right? I think it's actually definitional to CI. But I think what we struggle with, and this is to Craig's point, that we all do, struggle with the foresight, issue, because our biases are in the present, right? So as a species, we tend to be focused on what's ahead of us, what's here and now. And so the challenge for us is, to constantly train ourselves, towards looking at foresight, and also our teams, right? Encourage ourselves, our teams, to look ahead and, to not just ask those, the traditional so what questions, right? But, if questions and looking at various scenarios. So I think in order to enable the foresight, it's really important that we formally implement some exercises in ourselves and in our teams, within projects, and also at the programmatic level, overall in the CI program, and also in our interactions with our Intel users. And that helps us to overcome that and integrates foresight into CI, which is vital. Anyone have any thoughts?
I'd like to jump in for a second if I could. One of the things that I learned pretty early in my corporate career was from the senior managers that run large corporations. They will use the statement often that you don't run the business by looking in the rearview mirror, and that what you need to do is look out over the hood, particularly if you use the analogy of a car. Perhaps a way of looking at this question is not from the perspective of the producer of CI, but of the consumer of CI, because their decisions are never in the past. They're always in the future. And one of the distinctions, which could lead to additional debate, but I'll just throw in my opinion, between market research and CI, which includes foresight as a core competency in my view, is that market research is very good at coming up with precise and accurate descriptions of the past. Very good at that. They can review the past, they can look at numbers, they can go back 12 years, etc. I think people who are good at CI go back a little, but they ground themselves in kind of current thinking and then say, how's the market going to change, or how can we change it in the future to build or sustain competitive advantage for our company? So when you get into the mindset of thinking about the future, you're in alignment with your customer, and I think that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you, Cliff.
Just one thing.
Anyone else?
One thing to add from Eric here. I think I'm unmuted, aren't I?
Yeah, you are.
I've been hanging out with young people a lot lately. In fact, I'd like to introduce you to two young people who are working with me right now. Forrest and Liam are sitting here, and these two are part of my social media team here at Aurora, and they're both 16 years old. And I think the ability to look at the future from the perspective of an almost endless lifespan laying out in front of you is the perspective that makes a lot of sense from a future studies standpoint. And I think the whole concept, and you touched on this, learning from the future, the idea that the future is a learnable and teachable place, and that you're considering the alternative futures that you might encounter. The thing that I tell these guys is that foresight will always be about thinking the unthinkable and imagining the unimaginable, because that is really our job. Our utility as CI analysts is the one thing we're good at. We can think about things that are unthinkable to those who are so concerned with what happened in the past and what's currently happening right now. And then we can imagine things that are completely unimaginable to them, not unlike the way a science fiction story gets written. I think that's sort of my only remark on the topic.
A great remark too. Thank you. Terrific. And so I'd like to know if any other folks in the audience have any thoughts about foresight, through experience and observation. And Justin, you asked a really great question. I was about to respond via chat, but I'll just take advantage of this. Justin has asked that whether or not there are any formal studies on, excuse me here, well, this is a bit frozen here. Yeah, so if there are any formal studies on biases in CI. And so with that, so it says here, any studies of systematic biases when it comes to CI, either in analysis or in the interpretation of its deliverables. And in my experience, and Craig, maybe perhaps you have something different because you also have a foot in academia, that I've not seen much on systematic biases in CI, but there's a lot more in Intel in general. So a lot of work has been done in looking at intelligence in general, primarily government and military intelligence, and a lot of that actually is can be brought over into CI practices. But we can also look at biases in behavioral economics and look at those types of biases too, because they have because there's a relationship between that, obviously, and CI practices, because these are business decisions as well. And so, those are the areas in which we can look to. But I think it's really important too, that we also try to observe biases around us. It's more difficult to observe it within us, but I think as we train our skills in observing biases around us, we're able to sharpen our instincts, to that, and I find that it's easier to also be more attuned to our own, importantly, than to ask people to call out our biases too as they see it. And I think teaming on this can be very useful. So apart from from these studies, I think that there's a lot that we can do on our own in these areas. And Ben Gilad had written a book many years ago on blind spots, and that's a book on biases. And I know you've done some work in that as well. So I think the three of us you tend to have some experience with this, and we're happy to talk more about it. But I am so glad that you picked up on this, Justin, because I think many of the mistakes we make in Intel practice, it does involve biases of some sort, right, on the producer and user side. Craig, do you have anything else to add to the?
Yeah, I do. And actually, I got a couple shout outs and call outs to some of our fellows who actually either have been or continue to be doing research and practice in this area. I mentioned one in the chat box. So Judith Levitt, who some of you know as Judy, who's been a fellow for many years along with us. She is actually a certified futures and foresight professional. She got that certification from the Center for Foresight Studies down at Houston that Andy Hines Group has been running for probably 2 decades and still moving to this day. There's a couple other people too, and the one that comes immediately to mind, Cynthia, is Paul Dishman. Paul in particular has been doing research on cognitive biases, perceptual distortions, especially within the domain of kind of marketing applications of competitive intelligence for well over 2 decades as well. He's written a number of good papers on that. So for those of you who have an interest, I would certainly encourage those. Last but not least, I think the best resource that I tend to use, and many of us who teach in this area also continue to apply in our courses, is one by J. Richard Hoyer. Former CIA lead analyst and director of a number of their programs, and very well associated with the Sherman Kent School. There's a couple of publications he's put out. They're freely available and open source over the web, where he intelligence and analysis output. So I would recommend any of those 3 or more, and many of those, like I said, are available for contact right through the fellow site.
Yes, and and just a note, I know that Richard Hoyer's works are available open source via the CIA website, but also he and his team have compiled his works into a book, and that's available actually on Amazon. So and at various bookstores. So I just spelled out his name there because it requires spelling out, I think. But yes, absolutely, and that looks at the psychology of analysis. And I just want to mention too that there's a discussion on the chat. If you haven't been paying attention to that, there's been a sort of a book group forming almost, on some book recommendations on scenario analysis and planning and foresight. So please take a look at that as well. So terrific, and this has been a really robust conversation on this topic. And so we have another question too that says, I've found that CI is a key ability in organizations, yet it's hardly advertised as such in job ads and descriptions. What are some of the telltale signs that a position is CI related, even if it doesn't include competitive intelligence or even intelligence in the job description? So I see more smiles here among our panelists. Craig, why don't you start, because you have the broadest smile.
Well, I will, and the reason I'm smiling is another one of our fellows, a fellow named Dr. Tom Tao, who's at James Madison University, has been researching this particular question over the last year with a number of his senior students. And I was fortunate enough in April to sit in on a presentation by a group of those students who looked at this question of how do you actually identify whether CI tasks or roles or responsibilities are actually part of a larger set of different occupations. As most of us know, many companies won't advertise CI positions as CI for obvious reasons. So the question became, and the kind of the key research question the group looked at was, well, if it's not called CI, what is it actually called? And there was a couple of common elements that they found, and we are continuing to see. Number one, virtually all of them have research embedded in them somewhere. It usually has a high research component. Most of those jobs that they viewed as being consistent with competitive intelligence, the way they had defined it, also had the ability to use both open sources as well as human sources. So again, even though human wasn't actually the words that are used in a lot of these job ads, the ability to do primary research was critical in those. And it was often a differentiator between standard research jobs, for instance, market research or economic research or customer research, and the competitive research. Those that were focused on market phenomena, change and dynamism, that were looking often in global places, that had a product focus, that also included things like stakeholders, like customers, competitors. Those are the kinds of words that tended to be stated with the positions that they concluded were actually associated with CI. And I'll stop here and leave it to others too.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else would like to add to this discussion?
Yeah, it's Andrew Bershkins here from the UK. I would say a lot of the sins associated with this type of work are buried under the broad term of insight. So increasingly, the output from previously classic market research parts of the organization are now rebranded insight, right? And that insight typically stays with customer, but as you know, you're aware, there are other forces that influence how customers, relate to brands, and that might be competitor related, it might be supplier related, or it might be macro related. So I think there's a thousand sins buried in the term insight, which is increasingly a broadening, nebulous term in itself. And I think once people are in those roles, initially focused on relationship with the target market and customer, there is the opportunity and scope, with the right individuals, right culture, right skill set, the opportunity to broaden that scope beyond just customer.
And I think this is, yes, absolutely. And I think your point and Craig's point are important, because it speaks to the decentralization of CI, and that that Intel is more embedded in various functions than ever before, right? Sales, marketing, business development. Sorry, Yvonne, and others that it becomes more important to understand how each of those functions use the terminology, and some of the code words, if you will. Right? Analysis is obviously one of them. And so, if we're looking at things, terms like market insight analysis, we know that there is that in some organizations there's actually a CI component to that, even though it may not be on the whole. And so it's important for us to understand how industries and organizations are defining them, more than ever before, because to the point of this question, it's not necessarily evident anymore.
I could add a couple thoughts to this. There job descriptions that I've been either involved with or actually created had a variety of titles over the years that changed as the literature changed with it. I've seen the term strategic analysis, strategic business analysis, business analyst, business research, insight director. I've seen the term decision science analyst. I've seen the term, believe it or not, strategic planning, because if you look below the strategic planning title into the job description, there's a lot of overlap with what CI does. And I've even seen the term environmental analyst or stakeholder analyst. So essentially the overview is that all of these functions, from the perspective, again, of the client, kind of fall under the rubric of decision support. And perhaps that encompasses all of these. I think it's more important to not focus so much on what the title is, but what the job description actually contains in terms of the activities that are expected of those that work in these functions and the skills that they offer. And you'll find with these kinds of titles, if you compare what they actually do in the job description, there's an awful lot of overlap between a lot of the titles I just mentioned.
Yes, thank you. Terrific. And we also have some thoughts going on in the chats too. We have a comment says, but why avoid using these words in ads? Is it not more straightforward to just put the words in, right? And I'll just start by saying that in my observation, over the years, some companies want to keep their CI activities under the radar. Some companies also, because of some stigma that had been attached to it earlier on because of ethical violations, would simply like to prefer not calling it that. So there are a number of reasons why some companies might not be as direct about it. And in addition to the fact that CI has become embedded in a lot of roles, and so organizations may not even think to call out the CI aspect of it, even though it's very much integrated into what people do. So, yeah, any other thoughts on that?
Just one other thought. If you see companies that intentionally avoid the word intelligence in the title, it might not be a bad idea to check the backgrounds of the people who are working in human resources, and particularly those who come up with these titles, and whether or not they have military backgrounds.
Yeah.
Because if they do, they have a different view of what intelligence is, even though it's kind of moved from the military world to the business world.
Very savvy, Cliff, and it goes beyond HR. Because within the CI team itself, right? There may be there's some folks who just prefer not to use that term, for that. So terrific. And now we have a question actually that is more complex, and believe it or not. and so here it says, the group in which I'm working has been amalgamated with another group in a reorg. Unfortunately, the manager of the other group, who is now the overall supervisor of the amalgamated group, is focused on improving efficiency and enhanced service delivery, which in their mind involve doing things faster and cheaper with the same number of people, if not less. My questions are, have you ever been in a similar situation? If so, how did you handle it? Do you have any tips and tricks? And the second sub-question is, I'm worried that this manager's focus will result in us having to start cutting corners, even if we don't really want to admit it yet. Is this an unfounded worry? If not, what are the danger signs this might be happening? And then the third, if the corner cutting does start to happen, at what point do you feel I might need to consider alternative employment scenarios, i.e. cut my losses and run? So this is someone who's exercising foresight and insight with his own organization, which I think is very savvy. So yeah, who would like to take this question on first?
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So it's Andrew here, only because I can relate a lot to that, given the experiences that we've enjoyed. So yeah, for those people uninitiated, I'm an employee at BT. I used to work at another company that BT bought. And so, have gone on a similar journey in terms of two teams coming together, two cultures understanding it differently, and therefore putting them two together to make three. Seems to be a similar train of thought that you are going through. So yes, I can relate to the situation. And how did you handle it? So what we did here was that we basically, I suppose, created an environment where we could basically redraft and redraw the line. And the way we did that was but we broke it down into 3 bits, which broadly said, okay, there are enough frameworks out there in terms of where are you in the maturity curve, and where are those gaps relative to where you are, and therefore work out which teams are doing the stuff better and which teams could do the stuff better still. So we sort of broke it all the way down to that level, and then basically said, okay, what is the new future that we would like to create? So you're not looking for one side to replicate what the other one's doing, but actually create a new focus, a new vision, a new future that you can all rally behind, and everybody else's input into that future is just as valuable as either the one side of the house buying the other. I would argue that actually first stage isn't to focus on cutting corners. I think the first stage is to remove the duplication. The second stage is to commit to a certain set of standards that you would adhere to. And then the third area would then be to extend that to other parts. So it's not just about cutting corners. I mean, some of the dialogue that we've enjoyed here is about outsourcing as well. And it's about outsourcing the right bits rather than the wrong bits or all of it, or to cut corners. So, yeah, I think I would start the challenge in a different place, as we did here ourselves. Ensure everybody has skin in the game, but equally set it out within a timetable, which ensures that, yes, you move the answer forward, but everybody's got an understood time to input, and actually their input is just as valuable as somebody else's. So it does require a bit of sort of simplicity in terms of setting the rules of engagement, and rules by which nobody's ideas are wrong. Everybody, the only wrong idea is the one that's not raised, and sort of continue in that open environment, which is, learning mindset. We've all got things to learn from each other. No side of the house is doing it better than the other, and let's create a new good, given the fact that the broader context in which we're trying to operate has also changed.
Fantastic, Andrew. Thank you so much for sharing that. And you certainly have lived through this, and really appreciate your experience. And any other one of our fellows colleagues would like to weigh in on this question?
Yep, I can jump in. I would say on my side, and kind of relating to my previous experience in the industry, running a CI function for a big multinational in the food industry, actually in the drinks industry. I would say that what really you have to be kind of attentive to is that you don't focus so much only on the tactical issues and start delivering newsletters. Okay, so kind of the idea is maybe kind of you need to focus on what is essential. I think that Andrew already mentioned that, and maybe it's a way to challenge what is being done and actually kind of improve it. Focus on strategic things and focus on kind of enhancing value, not just service delivery. So service delivery, I kind of read it pretty much kind of start kind of delivering newsletters, but that normally is basically kind of on a tactical level, intelligence, and more kind of not more shallow insights, and not so much focus on strategic issues. So I would say that is something that would be the tip that I would give the person who actually kind of make this question.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Did anyone else have any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I would just add that usually if one group in the past had handled a certain number of projects and then the other group had handled another set of projects, it might not be a bad idea to have the leader of this group take a representative from both sides on a little around clients, and then sit down with the clients and suggest the list of all of the things that had been done in the past by the two groups, and just ask each individual to prioritize them from their perspective. And if it turned out that when you were done, half of the projects didn't get a lot of multiple client support, you could propose dropping a lot of things and only focusing on the things that really move the needle.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. Yeah, other thoughts from our fellows and practitioner colleagues? Yeah. Well, I actually have a couple of clients right now who are undergoing a very similar situation, and certainly clients in the past who have as well. And it's interesting because they take different approaches. One client is going through basically a reorg, top-down, and also a completely new digital initiative that they're implementing at the same time. And so there's a lot of emphasis on cost savings and efficiency along with that. But there are a lot of question marks about what that means. Now, obviously, what that means in terms of the questions that are posed here that you see on the screen, but also what it means, to various existing projects, future projects, the ways of working, and so what we've seen and is that does work, in many cases, is to be sure that you are aligned with what top managers are looking for. And not just in terms of what they're saying, but in terms of what they're doing. So to Cliff's point, absolutely, I think sitting down and taking stock, taking inventory. And that might even mean doing a sort of a quickie audit of your team and its practices to see, what current practices and methods will stay and what won't. And what may also be aligned with some of these new practices, because for example, with a client with this digital initiative, that this also means there are new tools that they can use, but that also means that there are new ways of working within the team, and so in some cases, it's more streamlined. In other cases, there's going to be a learning curve, and so really taking a look at that and understanding what that means. I also feel it's really important too to just be attuned to the organization from an Intel perspective. So it's not to say that you run a full formal Intel on your own organization, but really just put the Intel mindset on so that you're not affected by your own blind spots about your own organization and the way it practices. And so you've got the Intel skills in terms of intelligence gathering and analysis. Train that on your own organization to understand where they're at and how it's changing so that you can meet them there and perhaps even lead. So I think that that's also very important. The other thing that I find often associated with this too, and this has happened across clients, is when this happens, oftentimes the word agile is raised, and so everybody wants to work in an agile fashion. And but what I find though is that if you are not prepared to work in an agile fashion, that you don't know how to work in agile with a capital A, then you are positioning yourself for failure. And so I don't know if this is happening within your own organization, but if you're looking at efficiencies and basically looking at that developing your projects on an iterative basis, be sure that you have the framework to support that. Otherwise, it's very easy for tasks and goals, objectives to fall by the wayside. So those are just some things that I want to share. There's a whole lot to this, and so I think one of us would be happy to talk with you offline about it. So please feel free to reach out to us about this. But I just think it's really important to look at not just ways that you can manage this, but also potential pitfalls and be prepared for that. And then towards your last question, the question C, I do feel too that fit is really important. And if you find that this new environment is not a good fit for you, and you're not happy there, I know that's not a very scientific answer, but I do think that it's worth looking outward if you feel that you can't affect change, and if you feel that the intel that you're doing on your company is not pointing in the right direction for you, then I think that the answer could be there as well. So anyway, and Justin says, chances are if you ask 5 people what agile is, you'll get 10 answer. That's a minimum. And that's absolutely true. And so, there are formal agile practices. And so if folks want to do that, then it's really important that the team is on the same page about what those practices are, the expectation and so forth, as you're developing those efficiencies. So I'll take a step back on that because I think this is a soapbox that many of us can get on. But any other thoughts about this for our colleague?
Yeah, I'll just add one. What's interesting, every time you see faster and cheaper, it reminds me of the old dictum that you can have it faster, you can have it cheaper, you can have it better, and you got to pick 2 of the 3. So the one that's missing there is the better. And that always worries me because it tells me that maybe these executives in this organization, actually maybe don't value quality, deep, comprehensive, broad, confident kinds of insights. And by the way, if that is indeed the way that they feel, and I obviously not casting aspersions and don't know the context, but if that's the way they feel and it doesn't harmonize or align, as you were talking about, Cynthia, with this individual's values and their own way of believing that their highest value is to deliver quality intelligence, maybe they do need to consider the C aspect there on the bottom and, look at some other opportunities.
For sure, for sure. And I think it's also really important too to understand what's driving this. What's really at the root of this? What's in the, what's really driving, management's decisions towards this? Because, the key could be there, and that could be an opportunity for you. Because if what's driving this, is, maybe, a loss of market share, or perhaps other issues, now that that's really the critical area of focus. It's not so much efficiency and in value, it's that, right? And so that bit of intel that you run on your own organization, right? Running management analysis to understand, to peel back the layers, to understand the real drivers and not just what they're saying, right, to the employees is critical, I think, to Intel's success and how you align yourself, with their stated and unstated goals, positions, and drivers. So, anyway, any other thoughts before we wrap up this segment and move on to the next question? No? Okay. Yeah, and so I think that with many of these questions, if there needs to be follow-up, we can certainly follow up in our LinkedIn community group, and also with individuals as well. And so Cliff, at the beginning of this, you had mentioned that we had some ethical questions that are queued up, and so one of them is what are the differences in CI ethics in different countries, because as we go global, we have global practices, and people are finding themselves challenged and having a common CI understanding. And so how do people understand about them and know what to do? So any thoughts about how your colleagues, your clients, have been grappling with this, or even broader CI issues? Because I know we have other ethical issues. Because I know we have other ethical questions as well. Anyone want to take a stab at this?
Let me jump in on this one. I think the question needs to be revised a little, because it's really not the issue of what the CI ethics are in different countries that matters. What I think matters is what is the law in other countries that matters, because that's the starting point always. So an understanding of local law within a jurisdiction where you intend to do research or intend to do, let's say, primary interviewing or on-the-ground interviewing is important. But the overriding driver of ethical decision-making doesn't really come from the country. In my view, it comes from your company, particularly if you're a multinational that has developed a global ethics policy, which should actually be a higher level of authority than local law. So if, for instance, your company has decided that you will not pay for an interview anywhere in the world, and locally, if you go to certain parts of Latin America or Asia, it's a common local practice to do that, you can just decide before you go that you choose a different country, because the local law prohibits or is in conflict with the company's policy. Or for instance, if you were going to go to a country to look at the possibility of establishing a manufacturing facility, and you said, well, when I put it up, I'm going to put up all these environmental things to prevent runoff from going into the local river. And the local policy was it didn't matter whether it went into the local river, because locally there were no pollution laws. Well, your company should follow your global behavior and relate to that. It's not just an ethical decision, it's a business decision. So your ethical construct falls within your company's business code of conduct. And that business code of conduct should apply to all employees everywhere in the world. So I think the best way to look at it is stick with the guidelines your company has come up with wherever in the world you're going to do business. And if you have a question, in any case where you're concerned that a situation is one you haven't faced before, then rely on your compliance people, your legal people, or your ethics people, if you have them in a company, for guidance. That's my suggestion.
Terrific.
So let me add a couple of resources to those folks that are out there that may want to investigate this further. And Cliff, I'm glad I'm following you on this. Cliff and I and a few of the other fellows, by the way, were part of a task force back in the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professional Days, SCIP days, where we actually developed an extensive FAQ, frequently asked questions, list, as well as recommended responses. We had a whole committee of folks that, like I said, literally went through a number of the kind of practical ethics issues, such as the questioner's asking here, to try to come up with responses. And to take it one or two steps further, a couple of us at various meetings also developed some scenarios by which we allowed folks to actually think about what they would do facing an ethically charged kind of global context, and sometimes non-global as well. So the resources I would recommend, number one, there is a book that was put out under the auspice of the Competitive Intelligence Foundation. It was known as Navigating the Gray Zone. That book has not only those facts in it that Cliff, I, and others did, but it also has these scenarios and these contexts within which to look at how you go about making good, smart, prudent, ethical choices. The second one, there is, as many of you know, there are a number of ethics codes and practices that are published out there. SCIP has them. The FAQs document that we did is also published and out there in a number of different places. May require a little bit of sleuthing to find it today. But those resources, and in particular that book that I mentioned, is probably the single best one. Last but not least, there was a couple of individuals that did studies on ethics and competitive intelligence going all the way back to the mid-90s. One of whom's an old friend of mine from Penn State University that looked at the most common kinds of ethical dilemmas that CI practitioners face. And here again, if you go into Google Scholar and you look up the name Linda Trevino, you'll find her study on that. It was one of the best, and I'd argue one of the most timeless treatments, actually, from an outsider, someone who's not even in our field but was an ethics specialist, at the kinds of context and the kinds of responses that, you know, indeed connote ethical behaviors.
Yeah, Craig, let me just add something else as another resource. There's a group called the Council on Competitor Analysis that's run by the Conference Board, which a number of our fellows have been members of. And in the late 90s, right around the turn of the century, we did an exercise where we took a series of case histories and actually asked the members of this group, or 25 members in the group who are heads of CI at 25 different major multinationals, as to whether they had ethics policies in their companies that could be made public, so that other companies could learn from that and develop their own codes, internal codes in their companies. And in that Navigating the Gray Zone document that you described, there's about 10 of those that companies were willing to share. If your company doesn't have a policy yet, you can use some of those as a template for helping to develop one with your attorney staff.
Terrific, thank you. I do want to add a somewhat different perspective to this question, and you know, one that involves really more intelligence defense. Because when we're talking about CI ethics, oftentimes we think about offensively and our own behaviors, right? And keeping on the right side of ethics wherever we are, wherever we operate. But we also have to, in protecting ourselves from others conducting intel, you know, on our own organizations, you know, consider that ethical boundaries, ethical perspectives vary across the world as well. And so not all cultures and individuals and companies, right, share the same perspectives. And so it's important for us to think beyond that and thinking about, you know, the possibilities of how people might conduct themselves based on, you know, their own ethical perspectives and approaches. And so I think when we're operating global environment nowadays, it's more important, I think, that we think about this, and also, that we think about how ethical issues change, right, along with technology, right, along with various practices. And so, we see this happening, in terms of, technology and issues relating to privacy, and even, fake information and misinformation, disinformation that's being spread, and in various tolerances for that. And so all of this is wrapped into, to ethics in some newer ways. And I think that, there's some interesting work and considerations that can be done along these areas as well. So, yeah. And so another question is, how do we keep on top of techniques and developments to know that our practices are on the right track? How do we stay on top of things? It's a pretty broad question, but a good one, and a perennial one. Who wants to take a stab at that? And by the way, I just want to encourage the audience to share, their tips as well. And you can also include your favorite tool, which is the question after that, because we want to know what people are doing and sharing, and this is where also social media, the various CI communities, come in handy as well. So, anyone want to throw some ideas out there? How do you stay on top of your game, people?
So it's Andrew here. I think forums like this are a definite input into that. I think getting more broadly involved in other CI groups, because not all of the cake tastes the same, for want of a better analogy. I'm sure there is one out there somewhere, but yeah, not everybody gets on with everybody, and therefore there are other groups that are particularly helpful. I think the LinkedIn forums, while they may not encourage the right responses, I think that is helpful. And I think also the issue of, if you give, then you will receive. So I think anybody's perspective on new things, would encourage somebody to offer a new thing back. So yeah, I would say, learning mentality, get stuck in, and consume as you see fit.
Thank you, Andrew, for getting us started on that. Some great thoughts. Any other ideas? How do we? Actually, this is a question I've always wondered, and I'm just going to put you on the spot, Craig. Because you are prolific and you stay on top of so many different domains. So I'll just ask you, how do you do it? How do you have? I have a foot in academia, also in consulting and so forth. But you also, seem to be. You're also in business communications and various other areas as well. So any ways that you can sort of share how you manage all that?
Yeah, well, let me just start by saying the way I can't do it, and I actually went and spoke at a conference within the last couple of months, and the conference theme was, you got to get out from behind your PC, your laptop, your screen. So number one is, if we're sitting here at our desk all the time, you're not going to be able to stay up with technique. So, my simple and probably counterintuitive answer is, it requires you to be very well networked. You need to socialize in those networks. It's using all the social media that you have available to you. It's by having lots of conversations with your colleagues, by the way, within your company, where the vast majority of probably what you need to know in terms of evolving, emerging, effective kinds of techniques, tools that they're using. If you're in a larger company, there's probably somebody doing that somewhere. And so it's a matter of just being able to make sure that you have a network conduit by which to actually access them. Number two is, you got to dedicate time every day, staying on top of things. If you don't dedicate and you're not systematic about it, it's not going to happen by osmosis. So, there are things I do. I've been doing these for years. Every day I do set aside some time to make sure that if any important developments have, quote unquote, come across the transom, that at least I'm aware of what they do. And of course, I have a fairly sophisticated, well-developed system for, prioritizing those, archiving those, making sure that I actually do dive in deeper than just looking at a 140 or 280 count Twitter handle and things like that. And last but not least, You know, ongoing and continuing kind of learning and development in our field, it's critical. It's critical for people like me. And yeah, I'm one of the people that actually theoretically is supposed to be, you know, sharing some of these new and emerging techniques. And indeed, I try to do that. But having said that, it is amazing the kind of work that people like those on the call, or, you know, and frankly, half of our audience, I do see your names there, folks, and some of you know me and I know you too. So, you know, there are people out there that are doing some great things. And at the end of the day, we have to be able to be in positions of opportunity to share with them and to have them share back. There's got to be an exchange. And we just need to, and, you know, the CI Fellows is one of the conduits by within which that exchange is going to be facilitated and catalyzed. So I'm excited by that, because I'm learning something even as I'm sitting here listening to you guys today.
Absolutely. I think that learning that growth mindset is really important, as noted by Jean-Francois. And he also notes too that, you know, they're starting to use and adapt design thinking to CI. And so with that, you know, I do want to get to Luis about this. So I want to underscore the fact that, you know, it's so important, I think, you know, to tap into expertise. You know, we can't do it all, right? We simply just don't have enough time in the day. So I do rely on colleagues like Craig and Luis and, you know, Cliff and Andrew and Eric and Ellen and others, you know, in my conversations with them to learn about what's going on, because we're all specialists in various areas. And so it's a wonderful way of crowdsourcing, and design thinking is also related to that as well, because, you know, and of course it's more formal, you know, than what we're talking about. But if you have a group, you know, that you know, which you're employing design thinking, or perhaps, you know, even the Delphi method, where you just you're tapping experts on a systematic, regular basis, so that you can be sure that they are serving as your eyes and ears, and they are providing you some new ideas and insights. I think that's a wonderful way of staying on top without the pressure of having to do it all. But I can't talk about design thinking without pointing to my colleague Luis. And so, and Luis, you're also, you know, you're pursuing a PhD as well. And so, you know, how do you stay on top of everything?
I was just admitting myself to build on top of what Craig was saying. So I think that for us, it should be a little bit easier. When I say hey, us, I say kind of a CI professionals, because like what we should be doing is actually doing CI on CI. So we should be setting up early warning opportunity system to kind of to pick on the early signals on everything that's happening on the areas that interest us the most. And we should be doing some kind of a secondary research first to see what are the topics, what are the signals that are appearing in the competitive landscape of CI, of course, and then actually go into the UMINT and actually kind of a network and talk to people, and then use design thinking, use kind of the human-centered approach to also get the information from the kind of our colleagues which are kind of working in those areas. Actually, that's basically what I do. So I set up my own Google alerts. I set up my own kind of feeds. I set up Twitter lists. So I have Twitter lists for different topics. So I have Twitter lists for innovation. I have Twitter lists for CI. I have the Twitter lists for design thinking, and so on and so forth. So, but you have to be also building on top of what Craig already said, you have to really be systematic about it. So you have to have your own, if you do it just for your own, you have to do your own kind of a personal information management system, or PIM if you want. I build that on top of my kind of a Evernote account. So everything that I find, I just actually put it on my Evernote, and then I look for it when I'm kind of looking for it, or I want to go deep diving in one of those topics. I hope I answer your question. I'm not talking about design thinking. I was answering kind of and building on top of the previous topic.
Of course, and actually, I think you also tapped into a question that was asked about tracking, I believe, alerts, and so appreciate that. I think Fuwei Bender had asked examples of the online subscriptions and alerts to keep informed, and so you mentioned, you know, Twitter and just, you know, capturing things in an organized fashion. I think that's really important. So, and I know many of us are also on social media and various channels as well. So any other thoughts about alerts and ways of staying on top of things that way? And I just want to note that we're a couple minutes away from the top of the hour, so we'll be wrapping up soon.
Just one thought, not so much about alerts, but about sources. One of our colleagues, Ellen Naylor, has taken on her own, I believe, for many years, the responsibility of sort of summarizing the CI literature, and has kind of a list. I think it's up to something like 200, 250 books now that she has compiled that are in a library where she can go and take a look at the title and look at the contents, and that could be a source for you. She's also, in the role she plays in the fellows group, the person who makes announcements when fellows come out with new publications or new books through the various ways that the fellows communicate with one another. So Ellen is a wonderful source for this sort of thing, and it's too bad she wasn't able to make it today, but I think if she had been on this program, she would have mentioned that as a source.
Yes, and I'm just sending out her website is the BI source, for folks who are looking for that. So that list is on that is on that site that she has. And so so we are at the top of the hour, and we've only scratched the surface of all the questions that we got. And so what I'm going to do is we will post these questions along with the recording. That was quick, Luis. The questions along with the recording, because we have really interesting questions too. One is, what experience have panelists got to share in terms of pivoting their CI/MI programs by when the company has been acquired? And so that's related to the earlier question that we had received. And we also have social media and digital communication affected ethics, or with all the ways that people can be deceitful. Are there any tricks to figure out who's telling the truth digitally, socially, media, and video? Now, so many of these and so many of these other topics that are along the chat can be spun out into webinars unto themselves, right? Unfortunately, we only have 12 months of the year, but we'll try to tackle as much as we can also on our community group. And we are taking notes, to your comments and areas of interest, so that we can develop future webinar topics that you're interested in. So please stay tuned to that. And as always, I'm just going to actually, these are all the questions that I had queued up. But as always, please keep in mind that when we are on the internet, and we've got our website cifellows.com with an events calendar there, and also highlights of things to come, including other webinars. And we'll announce our September webinars there. We've got our Twitter at the CI Fellows, and also the LinkedIn community group that I mentioned is the Council of Competitive Intelligence Fellows. The recordings will be posted there, and we are actually we'll be posting the recordings for the last two, for this one and and last month's as well. Very soon, and now that we're all back from vacation. And so along with this one, we'll post these questions and get a conversation going there as well. And we'll probably reserve many of these questions too for future webinars, as well as future Q&As, because I think this is a really robust session, and I love the fact that we have way more questions than we have time. So thank you, and please, if you want to stay on top of these announcements on webinars, the CI Fellows newsletter. And so just send an email to that address there, and you'll be the first to know. So thank you all very much for joining us. And I'm going to stop the recording now, but we'll hang out and chat a little bit for those of you, who do want to hang out a little. But I appreciate your interest, and many of you, I really appreciate the fact that you join us every month. And we appreciate seeing these familiar faces and names and comments, and enjoy the community that you've helped us create. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, everyone.